have a good night together with whoever wants to join in.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't have any confirmation that we're actually live. It
I
says
think,
live. Let me check on my phone here.
yeah, I'm checking the live streams. Okay, I think it says we're live. It says please stand by.
Yeah, but I think the audio is coming through. That's just what I've like if I were to pull up my desktop view.
Okay. And then we got Human SVD, who did have a comment here. It says, I could have sworn there was another comment here. There was Human SVD. There definitely was. And then I don't know what happened to it. Because it said you were excited. You said you were excited. And then the
Yeah, maybe
ADL
it
must have
clears when it
decided that
goes live.
was.
I don't know.
Maybe that's possible. Yeah.
All right. Well, on the off chance that we were not live, because I just clicked the start broadcast button. I don't know what that does as opposed to stop streaming, but I'm Jim Dewey. This is Combating the Narrative. I'm here with Victor Saxon to talk about Black Fragility and, just general shitlibbery with respect to anti-white hate. Now, Victor was so kind as to dredge up an article from the Watertown Daily Times, and I'll share my desktop view with you guys right now. Well, I suppose I'll let you introduce and read it because it's a good one.
So this was actually something I found from reading an article that Rod Dreher wrote for the American Conservative, who was understandably annoyed at this, but this is about the Darrell Brooks trial. And this is a letter some person just wrote to them complaining about how racist and how terrible this trial is against the guy who mowed down 6 people with a car. Actually, I think he killed 6 people and probably mowed down a couple more. And this is the kind of thing that you sort of imagine exists in the abstract, where you got such pervasively self-hating white people who will basically take the side of any non-white person, no matter how rank of a criminal they are. But you don't get to see a whole lot of examples manifest this concretely. And then now we have one. Here it is. So I'm going to read through this, and if people don't like the mic quality I have right now, I'm sorry about that, but we're just going to go right ahead with it. But this is, you can tell the person who wrote this is white because apparently her first name is Lauren, if you scroll down to the bottom. So right off the bat, we have somebody who not only is anti-white, but probably just hates themselves too. Laura Halbert, yeah, that seems like a pretty white name to me. And if it's in Wisconsin publication, again, the probability game is in my favor. But okay, let's finally get around to it, though. Enough wasting time. So here's what she said. This is what she wrote in. Wisconsin v. Darrell Brooks will go down as yet another trial in Wisconsin with a racist, unjust outcome. Oh my. Justice was denied to Darrell Brooks repeatedly throughout the trial, and the outcome only solidified that we have a long way to go in our fight for justice in Wisconsin. Sounds pretty bad.
Well,
Throughout the
that's
trial,
the thing too is like in using the term justice, right? We clearly mean two different things. Justice within the framework of the left, in this framework that they've set up, is about tackling the cardinal sin, which is being white. And so so justice is just anything that does evil to whites. But continue.
Throughout the trial, the judge repeatedly cut off Mr. Brooks and refused to let him speak. The judge went so far as to deny Mr. Brooks his right to call additional witnesses and to testify himself. Mr. Brooks's actions were completely justified, given the way he's been treated the past year and throughout his life. Oh, there it is. Throughout his life. Throughout his life. So I don't even know why she bothered writing the first 2 paragraphs, because that last 3 words, throughout his life, is the cudgel and the club that they use to justify literally anything they do or excuse anything that these people do.
Well, and let's talk about throughout Mr. Brooks' life here. Let's take a look at the Wisconsin Circuit Court access here. I should have pulled this up. Well, here, you can continue reading. I'll pull that up. But
okay, sure. Okay, and then she says the majority of the individuals who testified were white. They ganged up on him to spread lies, and the judge was complicit. Mr. Brooks, a black man, was repeatedly told by the judge to stop talking, end quote. Numerous times the judge talked over Mr. Brooks, moved Mr. Brooks to another courtroom, and muted Mr. Brooks when she didn't like what he was saying. Did members of the jury receive any anti-bias training? Oh no. Oh no. What about anti-racist training? Do the members of the jury understand the meaning of equity in our criminal justice system? Why wasn't Mr. Brooks allowed to argue for jury nullification? Wisconsin's criminal laws were written by a racist, gerrymandered legislature. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Like laws against murder were created by a racist and gerrymandered system. So maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should reconsider the law.
They're arguing for jury nullification, which is definitionally not lawful. Like that's operating outside the confines of the law. So I don't know how you can claim that this is justice. The majority of the individuals who testified were white, number one, because this has been predominantly a white country and an especially white region. And he targeted white people at a Christmas parade. So I don't know what you want. Like, should we not allow people to testify on the basis of race?
Yeah, I mean, turn it the other way around, though. So imagine if Jim Bob Cooter or Jim Bob Cracker ran over 6 black people in Mississippi. And then would this person be complaining that a lot of the people in the jury were black? Would that ever happen on the face of this planet?
Would they have to take sensitivity training on?
Right.
Yeah.
But obviously, the main cudgel.
I don't know if you watched any of the preliminary hearings too, but he
was
treated with kid gloves. He initially had representation, and the judge was begging him not to do it.
Yeah, he's his own lawyer. He decided to be his own lawyer. Everyone knows the trope about doing that. Everyone knows the cliche about that decision. But yeah.
Well, and he decided he was going to listen to jailhouse lawyers, and get learned up on Black's Law Dictionary, and he's talking about admiralty court and subject matter jurisdiction. And they've got recorded conversations of this guy, for those of you who don't know, saying that his game plan here was to just delay, and draw this whole process out, waste time and money, and hopefully try and take it to appeal, because he's very obviously guilty. But
yes.
Let's take a look at the justice that was done to Darrell Edward Brooks Jr.
Well, I don't think you're open-minded enough to the possibility that maybe it wasn't Darrell Brooks. It was probably Darrell Brooks with a Y who did it, and maybe they got the wrong guy.
I grounds. I don't identify by that name, Your Honor. Well, that's just a.
Oh God, that was bullcrap too. Yeah, I heard about that.
But let's look. I'm pretty sure this is him. Let's take a look. 1999, substantial battery, intended bodily harm. He's still out on the streets. You know what? Let's take a look and see what he was sentenced to as well. Let's take a look at the case details. All right, and this is him. This is him. There's no.
Is this the right? So I saw there were 2 Darrell Brooks. There's like Darrell E. Brooks and I think Darrell R. Brooks.
I'm pretty sure he's E. Correct.
Well, we'll have to do an on-the-spot fact check.
I know he's on the sex offender registry, which would be much easier to find.
Wow, that's just the cherry on top.
Yeah,
what a guy. Yeah, that reminds me. I mean, I'd have to kind of unspool a whole other anecdote about that Swedish woman who held up the deporting of, I think it was an African or a Middle Eastern rape offender. I think they were kicking him out, but then this white Swedish woman held up the flight because brown people good. And so I think that's kind of what this Lauren woman is doing. Assuming the letter is not like a fake plant of satire, right? You got to keep that. Okay, that definitely looks like him. Yeah, okay, it's Darrell E. Brooks.
Yep, and he was 130 pounds. He's a little.
He's a light dude.
Conviction date: statutory sexual seduction, in Nevada. I don't know. We can take a look at what that means.
Seduction. Okay, I've never heard of that before.
I mean, it's not as egregious if it's like some, well, she was 17 and I was 19 type thing, but Let's take a look at the Nevada statute.
Human SVD says, it astounds me people don't carry out revenge attacks on people like this. Wisconsin better not let out this man.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
they threw the book at him, but I mean, if this had happened in California, I mean, there would have been a good chance that jury would have nullified for some reason or another.
That's possible, especially with a certain racial composition of the jury, O.J. Simpson style. Luke 1861 says, hi, Luke 1861. Glad to have you here. Glad you could make it.
But yeah, so it's just having sex with a person under the age of 16, and cannot therefore consent. I don't know how old. Well, in 2007, we can do the math on this. What's his date of birth?
15 years ago. Oh, he's how old?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to see.
It doesn't have it there. Why is it not there? I mean, it says age 40. Age 40, and so that means he was probably born sometime 1982. So he's 25 when he did that.
Okay, well that's not really. That's not.
Assuming,
that's not. All right, but this is the type of person we're dealing with, and he's out on the street. He's out on the street, and let's take a look at some of the other things too that he is.
Oh, Human SVD said she held up the plane, but he got deported later on. Yes, I'm glad you recognized that story because I kind of forgot some of the details. But yes, I'm glad you knew that one. I'm glad you recognized that. Tristan Von Bickenstein. Hey, Tristan, glad you can make it as well. Let's hope you stay a while. And we can make it interesting enough for you to stay.
Yeah, but let's take a look at just like 2011. Bail jumping, misdemeanor, class A, possession of THC, surprise there. Possession
that never happens.
Second offense. But, enforcing drug laws is racist, too. I'm sure we'll get to that later tonight because the plan is to take a look at Crash Course Black History, which does have a whole video about the war on drugs. So, resisting or obstructing.
Of course. Luke 1861 says, what are you guys talking about? We're talking about Darrell Brooks, and more specifically, a letter that was sent to a Wisconsin newspaper about some self-hating white person shilling for Darrell Brooks. It's kind of gobsmacking that it even exists, but holy crap, it does. So buckle up.
And it reads like it came out of some, social justice department at a university. Like I haven't done an early life check on whoever wrote that, but I'm certain that they're in academia somewhere, or at least HR. But strangulation and suffocation with a previous conviction, a Class G felony, and this was not that long ago. This was 2010, so he's on the streets after that. I'm sure he's not the guy in Anago. That's pretty far from Milwaukee. But State of Wisconsin versus Darrell Brooks, obstructing an officer.
Man, it just keeps going.
He likes to obstruct. Well, I mean, that's kind of a bullshit one, but you get the picture. This is not a good dude.
It's exactly what we learned, whether it's George Floyd 2 years ago or Rodney King in 1991 or Michael Brown back in 2014. They're always just the shittiest people that get held up as some kind of symbolic martyr savior figure. Like, they're just the worst people. Like, they're just awful, unambiguously. But
and so they're claiming justice has not been done to him, but where was the justice for all the victims of his previous crimes? Where's the justice for the people who were mowed down when this guy should not have been walking around a free man? I mean, I don't understand what they mean by Wisconsin's criminal laws were written by a racist, gerrymandered legislature. Like, number one, gerrymandering goes both ways, and Wisconsin, like much of the Midwest, is kind of purple. So at different points in time, gerrymandering has occurred with both parties. So, but that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But it's racist. Like you said earlier, is it racist to have murder laws? Like what would have been justice here? That's what I want, rather than attacking. What does Laura Halbert want? What should have been done?
No black guys ever go to jail is probably what she wants. But like Rod Dreher in the American Conservative article that covered this letter made a similar point that you were making. It's like, where's the justice for people who are under the hood of Darrell Brooks's car? It's like, why don't we think about that for a sec? But of course not. And
let's take a look in the mirror and reflect on our white privilege.
Oh yeah, we haven't finished it. Yeah, we haven't finished it officially. I'm sorry to be an autist about it, but I think
keep on keeping on, man. Let's keep finishing these last couple
So,
of paragraphs.
Wisconsin criminal laws were written by a racist, gerrymandered legislature. That knowledge alone is all you need, apparently, to delegitimize everything. Jury nullification should be an option in every single court case involving a person of color. Like, okay, why not every single court case in general? But apparently, if it's a person of color, then per usual, we got to upend the laws and upend our norms to make the world flat. I guess we learned nothing from what happened to George Floyd. Oh, there it is again.
Well, and I guess,
Sorry, you good?
Yeah, jury nullification is always an option. That's just somebody on the jury panel saying, you know what, screw you, this law isn't just, I nullify, and then hung jury. Like, that's what jury nullification is. It's almost as though they've heard this buzzword before, and they don't quite understand what it means.
Oh, totally.
Why just a person of color?
Right, yeah. Why not just everyone?
And that's where I get sick and tired of, like, this notion that Democrats are the real racists, because they're operating within this framework. Like, they want to talk about racism here and racial justice, right? But it's never been about justice. It's always been about demographic replacement insofar as the power dynamic is concerned. So,
well, even the power dynamic is a facade, because really every time you critically analyze it, you realize it's just constructed to make us feel bad and look bad.
Right. And
so even when people like us don't have the power, we still get targeted. Or somehow, even when we suffer, it's never as bad as the non-white people.
Well, in case in point, like, the whole James Fields thing comes to mind, where this is a man who, at the risk of getting my channel terminated here, this is a man who really just accidentally killed somebody. And if you haven't seen the video, maybe it's worth playing.
Oh, is that Charlottesville? Was that
Seville?
Yes, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah,
it's like they gave this James Field guy like 400 years because some ham planet of a woman had a heart attack after she jumped in the way of his car as he's trying to escape. And
now, if you read the Wikipedia page, apparently he hit something like 37 other people or whatever, but didn't kill them, which is kind of an important fact. But yeah, it's the same kind of punishment that Alex Jones got. Got like a $100 bajillion trillion fined for his satanic misdeeds, which are just obviously a message. It's a punitive message sent out to people who do things that the establishment, let's call them that, don't like. But I also want to mention Luke 1861 said, "High IQ stream. I'm very happy to hear it from you, Mr. Luke 1861. I hope we can keep that up."
This guy doesn't know we're midwits. No, thanks for the compliment, man. Glad to see you.
And Tristan von Wittgenstein also said, "It's like Nelson Mandela. He's considered a hero, but blow up buses full of kids." Yeah, it's another dynamic where you realize when people like Lauren here seem to show so much care and so much compassion for people like Darrell Brooks, but are just autistically unsympathetic to literal half a dozen dead people. Or like with Nelson Mandela, they don't care about how many people he terroristically killed or ordered to be killed or tortured, because he's the good guy in this sort of struggle. So, and it's against oppression, so it doesn't matter how many people you kill or torture as long as it's in the right name, as long as the power dynamic is tuned properly. So, right. In conclusion, screw these people.
I have to wonder if these self-hating whites understand that no matter what they do, they're never going to be the good guy. Like, they cannot cleanse themselves of this original sin of being born white, and it seems like that's what they're trying to do by writing.
That's what we'll get into with our later article, too. The John McWhorter article in The Atlantic kind of touches on that, too. But let's wrap this up. I'll wrap it up. I'll get going. So I guess we learned nothing from what happened to George Floyd. Nothing. 2 years later, and nothing has changed. Racism is alive and well in and outside of the courtrooms of Wisconsin. It's time we look in the mirror and reflect on our white privilege. How long are we going to stay silent and let more black men fill our prisons due to, now remember, they're in the prisons not because they commit crimes. It's due to our complicit racism. White silence is violence. Okay, that's such a university department slogan. Now I know where you're coming from. And another black man will have to spend the rest of his life behind bars because of it. Oh my God.
Well,
now, okay,
six
Jim
white
Dewey
people were deprived of the. Yeah, go ahead.
Not important, but Jim Dewey, did did you know that the reason those 6 people were killed and trampled underfoot by the car is because of us? Like, actually, it's our fault. Maybe we should go to jail instead of Darrell Brooks.
Yeah,
He's going to spend the rest of his life behind bars because of our complicit racism.
That's what I mean, is like they want to, and we'll get to this later, they want to talk about white fragility, but the black community, and even just the people of color, whatever that term even means. Well, we know what it means. It just means non-white. The non-white community is incapable of recognizing any ills within their own community. It's always got to be the fault of white people. So it's just laughable to me that they want to sit here and talk about white fragility. I have never, ever seen the white community defend a criminal like this. Like, is anyone sitting here defending Brenton Tarrant in the mainstream like this? No, absolutely not. Did anybody even try to defend James Fields in the mainstream? No.
People didn't defend Darren Wilson. People didn't defend Darren Wilson to this extent, largely in the mainstream. Or I'm sorry, I meant to say, who's the guy who killed George Floyd? I'm sorry, what was his name?
Derek Chauvin.
Derek Chauvin, my bad. Darren Wilson was the Michael Brown guy. Darren Wilson did nothing.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing too, is like the knee on the neck technique not only will not cause asphyxiation, but it's like standard operating procedure for a bunch of police departments to do that. And it's clear just based on his toxicology report that he had enough fentanyl in his system to kill a horse, but reality doesn't matter. And I think we need to bear that in mind, is like, no matter what we do here, we're always going to be the bad guy because, you know, the persons of color community is pretty fragile here. But we thought this was worth sharing just because it's just beyond the pale. Like,
it's illicit racial masochism, just of the worst variety.
Well, and I hate to be like, imagine if the situations were reversed. But I mean, can you imagine the level of media? Like, we're 2 dudes with, you know, a couple of ears listening, right? Can you imagine the national attention something like this would have garnered if it had been, if the situations had been reversed instead of...
If it was the Charlottesville guy, was it James Field, right? If it was him.
If somebody... Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We know what it would look like. But let's keep moving on here. I'm going to put up my little transition screen as we start moving on from that op-ed there. So
yeah, I hope we can put that archived link in the description of our video when the stream gets done, so people can
I'll throw that out there.
it.
If in hindsight, I probably should have put that in the description here. But so I suppose the next one to tackle actually could be the Atlantic article on white fragility here.
Yes.
So just get OBS going. All right. So since you read the last one, I'll take this one.
Okay.
This is an article posted in the Atlantic. This is an archive link addressing a book that talks the popular book to combat racism, but talks down to black people, to use their little preamble here. I must admit that I had not gotten around to actually reading Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility until recently. But it was time to jump in. DiAngelo is an educated professor and, prominently today, a diversity consultant who argues that whites in America must face the racist bias implanted in them by a racist society. Their resistance to acknowledging this, she maintains, constitutes a white fragility that they must overcome in order for meaningful progress on both interpersonal and societal racism to happen. And I think this is a key term here. Progress. Progression. Progression towards what? I mean, like...
Fair question to ask.
But continuing on...
Well, I mean, if I want to burn about another minute of everyone's lives here, if you read a certain unnamed manifesto by a certain unnamed bomber from the mid-'90s, he does address that sort of point of, if you were to give leftists, or we could call them progressives, it's interchangeable in my mind, everything they ever wanted, and you could institute every policy that they wanted to institute right now, unimpeded and unopposed, they would still find something not that long afterward to complain about that needs to be changed. Like, it never ends, ever. Which is why I think giving it to such people is a bad idea.
it's important to recognize that the slippery slope fallacy is not fallacious in the slightest. Like,
Right.
I'm old enough to remember when all these referendums were happening around the country as to whether or not certain states were going to allow gay marriage. This was before Obergefell v. Hodges, and this was the argument is, well, we just want, and even prior to this point, the argument was, well, we just want civil unions and the same legal recognition that heterosexual couples want, and then it escalated from there. Well, we just want to be able to get married, and they were saying at the time, like, it's not like we're trying to mainstream the whole tranny thing, or it's not like we're trying to, make mainstream pedophilia, which is also on the fringe now, but they can't even articulate what the end goal is either. I'm not even certain they're aware. It's just...
Oh, you're probably right about that.
It's similar to... like, they need this programming. They need the next program, the next software update to be pushed out. They need the next thing. That's why we jump from COVID to Ukraine to whatever the next issue du jour is. Like, they need somebody to tell them what the next thing to progress to is. They don't have an end state in mind.
And then I just put a link in the chat for is Ross Duhad of the New York Times, basically underlining how the slippery slope urge that people on the right tend to feel is pretty accurate. I mean, Grug Brain has some merit to it, and I think that's kind of what he demonstrates in the article. I also wanted to say, when I was listening to a video from The Distributist, I guess you can say what you want about him for being an NRX guy and a total Curtis Yarvin stan, but also the point he makes is that with issues like open borders or pedophilia, that maybe, I mean, certainly people aren't on the fringes pushing for it, but like if it were to ever get pushed in any major or mainstream capacity, you just know it's going to come from the left. So when they're talking about meaningful progress, you know that those things are on the rise, and it doesn't matter how many times they gaslight you into thinking that it's not going to ever become an issue. It will. Okay, just ignore them. Just understand that they're lying to you, and then work against what they're trying to do to you. That's all I have to say.
Continuing on, White Fragility was published in 2018, but jumped to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. As an aside, the New York Times bestseller list is like a meaningless thing. It's similar to like Amazon bestsellers. Like sometimes these authors are just straight up buying their own books. And I don't have any studies proving this, but I do know there are studies floating around out there that state that like nobody ever reads articles that get published in academia. I suspect that this is a similar thing. Like nobody's ever actually reading. Who do you see reading books these days? In the normie sphere, nobody.
Now, probably ebooks, if books at all. But I'm trying to remember which book. I think Ted Cruz complained one time that one of his books sold a lot, but wasn't on the New York Times bestseller list for some reason. That might have been the case with RFK Jr.'s book about Dr. Anthony Fauci. That there might have been a similar situation there. So yet another supposed mainstream indicator or marker of something being good or trustworthy has been captured and politicized to hell and back. So yet another thing we can't trust anymore. Yay.
But the New York Times bestseller jumped to the top of the New York Times bestseller list amid the protests following the death of George Floyd and the ensuing national reckoning about racism. I laugh because it certainly was a reckoning. I don't know if you guys remember, but Pepperidge Farm remembers when the country burned for about 9 months.
We got reckoned all right.
Yeah. I'm surprised they used that verbiage there.
He died. He died. He apparently wasn't killed, interestingly. I mean,
yeah,
that could just
they'll use murder is the word.
I could be looking into it. I could be looking into it a little too much, but that verbiage, that word selection is intriguing to me.
They may just not be great wordsmiths. I mean, these guys don't...
Well, John McWhorter's like an actual linguist, hilariously enough. I guess there's that.
Okay. D'Angelo has convinced Yeah, D'Angelo's convinced university administrators, corporate human resources offices, and no small part of the reading public that white Americans must embark on a self-critical project of looking inward to examine and work against racist biases that many have barely known they had. I'm not convinced. Rather, I've learned that one of America's favorite advice books at the moment is actually a racist track. I really don't like that we're, operating within their framework. But continuing on. Despite the sincere intentions of its author, the book diminishes black people in the name of dignifying us. The Democrats are the real racists.
Well, now this is John McWhorter, who is black as well.
Right.
So, I mean, that's just the kind of parameters you have to put up with. But,
Right.
Yeah.
This is unintentional, of course. Like the racism D'Angelo sees in all whites. Still, the book is pernicious because of the authority that its author has been granted over the way innocent readers think. Reading White Fragility is rather like attending a diversity seminar. D'Angelo patiently lays out a rationale for white readers to engage in self-examination that, she notes, will be awkward and painful. That's an understatement.
You know the half of it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Their chapters are shortish, as if each were a 45-minute session. D'Angelo seeks to instruct. She operates from the now familiar concern with white privilege, aware of the unintentional racism ever lurking inside of her that was inculcated from birth by the white supremacy on which America was founded. Original sin. He's making good points here. To atone for this original sin, she's devoted to endlessly exploring, acknowledging, and seeking to undo whites' complicity with and investment in racism. To D'Angelo, any failure to do this work as adherents of this paradigm, often put it, renders one racist. I feel like that people of color, to use their own term, feel like that white people are just constantly thinking about minorities and how to get one over on them. Like, most whites truly strive to be colorblind and have other things going on. Like, they have to be told they're racist.
Hold on, sorry to interrupt you. Human SVD said, Victor Saxon, which statement? Was I referring to a statement? I can't quite remember what you're alluding to. I'm very sorry about that, but I do want to answer your question at some point.
Yeah, I know there's a delay on the stream, but just let us know. I do agree that James Fields was a sacrificial piece. I mean,
just like Alex Jones now.
Yeah. I mean, it's just disgusting to me too that nobody is rallying behind these people. But
he's saying the right doesn't have any balls or backbone.
No, yeah. I mean, if they did, we would have conserved at least something.
Yes, yeah.
Most people now most likely do not read outside of social media. Yeah, some of that too is related to the decline in quality of life most people have. Like, people are working a lot more hours than they ever used to, and we've moved to dual income households. So there's like nobody at home during the day to maintain a household, which I don't have to tell you guys can be a full-time job in and of itself at times. Like, but that's a digression. We can talk about that at some other point in time. But continuing on, as such, a major bugbear for D'Angelo is the white American, often of most education, who makes statements like, I don't see color, or asks questions like, how dare you call me racist? Her assumption that all people have a racist bias is reasonable. Science has demonstrated it. The problem is what D'Angelo thinks must follow as a result. I'm going to need a citation here, unless he's referring to, like, general in-group preference, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one way to spin the idea of having a racist bias. Because obviously, in the minds of people who position themselves as libertarians or classical liberals or normies in a broad sense, think that showing a preference towards your own race is racist, just out of hand, a priori de facto. But I think to people who are a little more sensible, that's not a charitable way to interpret it.
Well, and these are the same people who want to have this chauvinistic in-group preference towards their nation over other like nations, which is not inherently a bad thing, like Ryan Falk will call it petty nationalism, but I don't understand. Like, you must be doing some ridiculous mental gymnastics to have an in-group preference for people within a geographical border, but not for people that are genetically most similar to you.
Yeah, that seems like a level of Wilbertness. What I mean by that is sort of adherence to abstract principles without adhering to anything else that you don't really find in anyone else except libertarians. I don't think even libertarians would hold this kind of petty nationalist attitude. But the weird thing, though, is when you talk about racist bias, where you could interpret it as people putting their group first in a certain way, and I think that's what John McWhorter's literally doing in this article, where you got a racist tract like White Fragility, which I think you and I would contend is bigoted towards people like us. And then you look at the subheading of the article, and the major gist of the article, especially when you get to the end of it, is that it's racist towards black people. Like, that's the takeaway, ultimately. I mean, he makes other good points in here, which is why I'm reading it. But, like, the black guy decides that the book Racist Against White People, the most important thing to take away is that it's somehow racist towards black people as well.
Yeah, the
Like
victim
that
complex is just disgusting. Like,
it's like, okay, John, you do you, I guess.
right. Or even the notion that the fact that, blacks are disproportionately criminal and therefore end up in prison at disproportionate rates is somehow, victimizing blacks as opposed to the people who have to suffer the crimes they commit.
Yes, that lopsided empathy for different victims. But let's get going. Let's keep reading.
D'Angelo spent a long time conducting diversity seminars in which I think I read that part already.
Catechism? No, I don't think you have.
Oh, yeah. D'Angelo spent a very long time conducting diversity seminars in which whites exposed to her catechism regularly tell her, many while crying, yelling, or storming towards the exit, that she's insulting them and being reductionist. Yet none of this seems to have led her to look inward. Rather, she sees herself as the bearer of an exalted wisdom that these objectors fail to perceive, blinded by their inner racism. D'Angelo is less a coach than a proselytizer. When writers who are this sure of their convictions turn out to make a compelling case, it is genuinely exciting. This is sadly not one of those times, even though white guilt and politique have apparently distracted many readers from the book's numerous obvious flaws.
I want to mention here, though, that I heard, because I go to university right now, I heard, I guess, a phrase that could quote-unquote trigger me, but was really suspect when I first heard it, the concept of interrogating privilege. And so when she mentions things like yelling or crying or storming towards the exit, it seems like a Chinese struggle session. I mean, I remember reading during my Cold War history class about in communist China where they would take those landlords and they'd encircle them and they basically just bitch to them about how awful they are. And then you just kind of had to put up with it. This seems very reminiscent of that sort of Chinese struggle session. And even worse, the fact that, as McWhorter claims here, D'Angelo hasn't even bothered to look inward about it communicates to me some kind of very, very I don't know, sociopath-like, or this unwillingness to be self-critical about the imminent harm that she's doing to white people. But then again, they're just white people who are privileged, so who cares if you're harming them, right? Maybe that's how she rationalizes it.
Right, and that's how you have to rationalize a lot of the actions the left is taking to do things from disenfranchising whites in their own nation to actively victimizing them in the pursuit of higher education or jobs. Is you have to dehumanize them on some level, insofar as you drum up this victim narrative that not only have they done evil to you in the past, but if left unchecked, they will do evil again, so you have to preempt it. But Human SVD says, Finn Wraith, they have a healthy military complex, though I'm not sure how long the feminist enforced state order they have will last. It's going to take massive prices impacts to them into gear. I'm not sure about that last sentence, but
I think they're having a separate conversation. I feel like that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I know he's talking about sort of the draft for women, or women being allowed into the military.
Oh,
and
I see.
My one take on that is, yes, all things being equal, like if we're looking to talk about a peer-to-peer conflict between, say, China and the United States, things like that will matter. But when we're shifting into what people like William Lind, which we could even do a separate stream on that man later, but he wrote a lot of the Marine Corps doctrinal publications and things like that. But as we're shifting into this fourth generational conflict in which the state is becoming delegitimized, right? So corporate entities are starting to have a much greater political impact than they ever used to. The enemy is no longer, as we become more and more globalized, the enemy is no longer another nation state, but various guerrilla groups. So unified by certain things like religion or race. IDF is a bitch. Indirect fire, that is. Like, it's not.
Oh, okay, not the Israeli Defense Force.
Well, them too, but like, and that's what a lot of the people who volunteered with the Reddit Ukrainian Legion are finding out the hard way, or found out the hard way, as Russia like dropped whatever their equivalent to a JDAM is on their hotel where they were staying. Like, ultimately, it's not going to matter technologically when we're fighting a guerrilla force. But moving on. For one, D'Angelo's book... Well, actually... Sorry, I'm just reading chat here. For one, D'Angelo's book is replete with claims that are either plain wrong or bizarrely disconnected from reality. Exactly who comes away from the saga of Jackie Robinson thinking he was the first black baseball player good enough to compete with whites? Imagine if instead the story, D'Angelo writes, went something like this. Jackie Robinson, the first black man whites allowed to play Major League Baseball. But no one need imagine this scenario, as others have pointed out, because it is something every baseball fan already knows. Later in the book, D'Angelo insinuates when white women cry upon being called racist, black people are reminded of white women crying as they lied about being raped by black men eons ago.
Oh, God.
Citation needed. FBI Crime Table 43 would like to have a word with you.
Well, I mean, and the funny thing, though, the funny thing, now that I'm slowly forgetting it as I bring it up, but it's like, if I was given the job, if I was a contractor and they're to give me a job, okay, we need to find some justification for how, no matter what these white people or white women do, you have to find a way to spin it as bad. It's like, okay, what happens if they cry when they get accused of this avalanche of bullshit? Oh, well, if they cry, it will remind black people of how white women cried when they lied about being raped by black men.
And it's like, what is this? Assassin's Creed? Like, is there some sort of genetic imprint on these black men? Like, they see a white man crying and they immediately...
Intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma.
That's a real thing that they claim that they have.
And remember, believe Christine Blasey Ford, right? Believe whoever accuses Donald Trump. But, these white women, apparently pervasive enough to be regular liars against black men. Don't believe them, of course.
Yeah. Oh my God. I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole of FBI Crime Table 43. And it's like, there's no reason to think that they just became disproportionately criminal. Like, I digress. An especially weird passage. Black people.
But as you were saying, he said, "But how would she know? Where is the evidence for this presumptuous claim?" And you said citation needed, so you guys are
right.
We're on the same page there.
An especially weird passage is where D'Angelo breezily decries the American higher education system, in which she says no one ever talks about racism. I can get through graduate school without ever discussing racism, she writes. I can graduate from law school without ever discussing racism. I can get through a teacher education program without ever discussing racism.
Bullshit! That's all I have to say.
That anyone who's ever been to a classroom ever knows that is not true. That is not
It's
true.
like, I remember Spike Lee. It was back in the 1619 Project when that was getting publicized a few years ago. He was doing some stupid interview, and he was saying, this stuff about slavery, man, they don't teach this in schools. It's like, oi, you are stupid.
Yeah, that
you
is
clearly didn't go to a school.
I think there's been a transition from history to social studies. Like, that's what... Yeah,
Oh no,
it's just
there's no way there's anything suspect about that.
well, and I mean, I feel like higher education has lost sight of the fact that their purpose is to educate people to a higher level so as to, prepare them for another job, not, inculcate them so they can go free. Like, I don't understand. If I'm in school for engineering, why do I have to take courses on how racist I am? Like, it's a non-sequitur.
Well, as I'm sure Ryan Falk would say to something like that, the learning institutions historically have always had the religious studies right alongside it. You had the cathedrals headed by the bishops and emissaries of the Catholic Church. And now here you just got the new religious studies, as Jonathan Haidt would call it, or John McWhorter himself too calls it the anti-racism religion. So surely enough, you want to go to school and learn your engineering or learn your science or learn your math, you got to learn your religious studies right alongside it, like a good boy.
Well, and Tristan Wintle in the comments here points out correctly, black is capitalized and white is lowercase. And
yeah, he's following the
stuff to be unpacked there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, number one, it's not even like grammar to them. It's just trying to emphasize that black people are of greater value than whites. But that's a good call out. I am mystified that D'Angelo thinks this laughably antique depiction reflects any period after roughly 1985. For example, in an education school curriculum, neglecting racism in our times would be about as common as a home unwired for electricity. D'Angelo's depiction of white psychology shapeshifts according to what her dogma requires. On the one hand, she argues in Chapter 1 that white people do not see themselves in racial terms, therefore they must be taught by experts like her of their whiteness. Experts. But for individuals who harbor so little sense of themselves as a group, the white people whom D'Angelo describes as are oddly tribalist when it comes to suit her narrative. White solidarity, she writes in Chapter 4, requires both silence about anything that exposes the advantage of the white population and tacit agreement to remain racially united in the protection of white supremacy. But if these people...
Yeah. Racially united. Now, for those who were able to see the early part of the stream listening to Lauren Halbert, the ethnomasochistic sack of human filth, is just one example of how this white solidarity concept is dumb. Like, it's just dumb. There's no other word for it. I mean, people like us would wish that white people had more solidarity with each other instead of being as deracinated and neutered as we are.
That's what I mean. I'm wondering what white people these people are even encountering where they're drawing these conclusions. And the biggest purveyors of racial solidarity are obviously the black community. Like, people are writing op-eds about how somebody should get off after running their car through a Christmas parade because they're black. Now, I suspect, as does Victor here, that author was white, but that's a widespread attitude. Or even look at George Floyd. Like, I remember during the height of COVID, I was working at this place with like black receptionists, right? And they're blasting black talk radio, and that's the only thing they would discuss is how whitey is trying to get one over on black people, and black people need to remain united, and that's why there exists terms within the black community like Uncle Tom. There is no conception of that within the white community. None. It does not exist in our lexicon.
Well, I mean, there's self-hating white person, but that's not very, doesn't really roll off the tongue very well. And it's not used as often as
Fringe, like you and I. Like, it's not anything you'll ever see, even with conservatism.
A funny example of that in the black community. I think, Cornel West, I'm sure some of you might know, criticized Obama because Obama was a warmonger who droned 1 million people. And then Steve Harvey got mad at Cornel West and called him an Uncle Tom because he dared to criticize Barack Obama. Like, it doesn't even matter. It was completely deracinated and unconnected to, like, political topics. Steve Harvey was just so mad that a black person criticized Obama that he just felt the urge to call him a race traitor.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, too, even within, they have more of, an innate dislike of miscegenation than white people do, certainly. Like, I've heard anecdotally, like, black women all the time talking about how they have disdain for black men engaged in interracial relationships. Like, that's something that
The funny thing going on with that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I mean, the funny thing about that, though,
you won't see outside of the Louisiana bayou. Like, that's not something that white people will even ever discuss, even if they think it privately.
Oh, I know. No, definitely true. Well, the funny thing, if you look at the Wikipedia page, I think, about interracial marriage, it mentions how black women are, in a sense, suffering some form of undermarriage because black men can now choose from a wider selection of women, and they're deciding, you know what, non-black women kind of look better. And so then a bunch of black women are kind of getting left in the dust, and they're obviously not happy about that.
It's going to be hilarious 150 years from now when all this stuff comes full circle and there's like Jim Crow again.
Oh, jeez. I wouldn't expect that. That seems unlikely.
Well, insofar as like they're removing white people from black spaces, like I'm sure
that's true, actually. But yeah, like
that's more what I'm
approaching from the other angle.
That's what I'm driving at, like the horseshoe theory.
Yeah, oh, that's totally true. That's totally true. That could
or
be
like
a topic
even that's actually how I got that bad empanada guy banned from Twitter again. Is he's posting like it's so funny to me because he's like advocating for a white reservation or like a white ethno state. And
what?
It's like, yeah, it's not super important. It's on my Twitter, and I made a short video about it, I think. But essentially, this guy posted a map of the United States in which he had sectioned off everything but like the panhandle of Florida for people of color, and then he labeled the panhandle of Florida the cracker containment zone, KKK. And I was like, man, I'm more on board with that than you think.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Let's work together on that.
Yeah. There's some middle ground here. I don't know that I want the panhandle of Florida, but
better than nothing.
Yeah. Which is what we stand to have in the very near future.
Anyhow.
But for individuals who harbor so little sense of themselves as a group, the white people whom D'Angelo describes as oddly tribalist when it suits their narrative, white solidarity, I already read this. But if these people don't even know whiteness exists as don't even know whiteness as a category, just what are they saying now suddenly?
What are they suddenly defending?
Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. D'Angelo also writes as if the shibboleths of the black left, for instance, that all disparities between white and black people are due to racism of some kind, represent the incontestable truth. This ideological bias is hardly unique to D'Angelo, and a reader could look past it along with the other lapses in argumentation I've noted, if she offered some kind of higher wisdom. The problem is that White Fragility is the prayer book for what can only be described as a cult. We must consider...
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad he finally called it out.
Yeah. I mean, it's just obvious at this point. We must consider what is required to pass muster as a non-fragile white person. Refer to a bad neighborhood and you're using code for black. Call it a black neighborhood and you're a racist. By D'Angelo's logic, you are not to describe such neighborhoods at all, even in your own head. But they fail to analyze here, like, why are the terms black and bad interchangeable here? Like, maybe we should spend more time analyzing why that is.
Well, one thing that you're forgetting is I think it was around 1962, there was the Council of St. Louis that decided that they're going to take the words black and bad and just put them together and disseminate that concept in the media. Haven't you heard of this?
No,
haven't you heard of
this? To me.
Because I'm spewing bullshit. I'm mocking what she's saying. It was decided and ordained apparently somewhere that they decided to call black people bad.
Yeah, no, I got that you're being.
That's what the okay.
But
it had absolutely nothing to do with their behavior or how they tended to interact with other people. It was just kind of maliciously invented to make them look bad for, I don't know, some reason. You know, we're just that awful.
And that's what I mean is it's important to note that in discussing like things like White Fragility, like the people who are double plus bad, you know, the people on our side of the aisle, you know, sort of the fringe alt-right, we're highly quantitative. Like we're sitting here and we're pointing to crime statistics and things of that nature, whereas the left is qualitative because they don't have a quantitative leg to stand on. Like you cannot point to anything other than like buzzwords that you've made up.
Now that I disagree a little bit with. I think people like us know that the depth of leftist research to support literally any left wing position, no matter indefensible, is massive. I think that's why there's so many thoughtless NPC normie shitlibs out there, is because they can just think in the back of their mind. I think that's what Ryan Fulton calls Magic Science Man. You can hold any stupid left wing position, and if it gets questioned, you can just appeal to the fact that, oh, well, a bunch of university professors and dumbasses in the media have said that I'm right, so I can just lean on that fact.
Right.
So I think a lot of stupid people, because they don't really understand the intricacies of the research, they just don't use it. They just use the buzzwords because that's easier. But I think there are higher tier people, and those are the ones who have like faculty tenure and whatnot, who do appeal to, we could argue, a bullshit reservoir of research, but still a very large pool of it.
Right. Moving on, what we must consider what is required to pass muster. I'm sorry. You must never cry in black people's presence as you explore racism, not even in sympathy, because then all the attention goes to you instead of black people. If you object to any of the feedback that D'Angelo offers you about your racism, you're engaging in a type of bullying whose function is to obscure racism, protect white dominance, and regain white equilibrium. I'm unsure of what they mean by white equilibrium. Do you know what they're referring to there?
Oh, I think white equilibrium might be what they call the natural imbalance. We got to find a way to bring back this challenging to the inequality. We're finding some way to balance it out so it favors us again. So even when we get told we're bad people, if we cry, we're bringing the attention back to ourselves and restoring this equal equilibrium, this evil equilibrium. I think that's what's meant by that.
That is a pretty strong charge to make against people who, according to D'Angelo, don't even conceive of their own whiteness. But if you are white, make no mistake, you will never succeed in the work she demands of you. It is lifelong, and you will die a racist just as you will die a sinner.
Yep.
Remember also that you are not to express yourself except to say amen. Namely, thou shalt not utter, I know people of color, I marched in the 60s, you are judging me, you don't know me, you are generalizing, I disagree, the real oppression is class, I just said one little innocent thing. Some people find offense where there is none, you hurt my feelings, I can't say anything right. Now, the thing that sticks out to me here is the real oppression is class. Like, they will eat themselves alive. This is a left-wing talking point. You will never find anybody on at least mainstream conservative, thought spaces talking about the class oppression that exists. If anything, like, the middle and lower class will fillet big business because that's what they were taught to do. So this sort of tilts the hand of the left that it's never been about justice. It's
right.
About race.
Right, certainly that portion of it. But you got like the anti-imperialist left types, the more Marxist types, the classical Marxists who say it is a class thing. Like when the 1619 Project originally came out, and you had the World Socialist website of all publications come out against it because they saw it as some way to divide us along racialist lines and distract us from how the oligarchy is screwing us over and trying to divide the proletariat, and that's trying to oppose the oligarchy. So, right, if that little bullet point is ever brought up, it's usually from someone that's got to be on the left. Like, I don't really conceive of right-wing people bringing that up that much. I just don't.
And that's what I mean is, like, I used to be a neocon. I was a very strong...
Same here.
I was like a John Bolton type.
Yeah. Total Zionist, invade the world. There were WMDs in Iraq. They just got shipped to Syria. That kind of guy.
Yep. I was all on board with it. I was all about warmongering with Russia and China, but that requires that you sort of buy into this left versus right dichotomy, that sort of framework, and that's not where the true dichotomy lies. Not today. This is an abridgment of a list D'Angelo offers in Chapter 9. Its result is to silence people. Whites aren't even allowed to say, I don't feel safe. I wonder why they wouldn't feel safe. Only black people can say that. I revert back to Crime Table 43. If you are white, you are solely to listen as D'Angelo tars you as morally stained. Now breathe, she counsels you to keep you relaxed as you undergo this. She does stress that she is not dealing with a good-bad dichotomy, and that your inner racist does not make you a bad person. Oh, but it does. That's the whole point. The whole point is you are bad because you are racist. You just need to know about how racist you are to understand how bad you are.
And don't question it, okay? Just don't.
But with racism limbed as such a gruesome spiritual pollution, harbored by individuals moreover entrapped in a society within which they exert racism merely by getting out of bed, the issue of gray zones seem beside the point. By the end, D'Angelo has white Americans muzzled, straitjacketed, tied down, and chloroformed for good measure. But for what?
Preach, John McWhorter. He's totally right about that.
No,
but we're pinned down. We're pinned down. We're just supposed to take it on the chin that we're like borderline, irredeemably evil, and don't do anything about it. God damn it! Don't do anything about it.
Just stand in front of the open pit and wait to get shot in the back of the head. It's like,
maybe that will absolve you. Maybe if you're executed, that'll absolve you. But I don't know. It's probably still got work to do.
But you should feel bad that we're having to expend money on ammunition to execute you in the process because of your...
I know, it's just another sign of privilege. Even when you die, we got to spend money. Oy vey.
Oh my goodness. And herein is a real problem with white fragility. D'Angelo does not see fit to address why all of this agonizing soul-searching is necessary to foregoing change in society.
Forging change.
Forging, I'm sorry. One might ask just how a people can be poised for making change when they have been taught that pretty much anything they say or anything they think is racist and thus antithetical to the good. What end does all this self-mortification serve? Impatient with such questions, D'Angelo insists that wanting to jump over the hard personal work and get to solutions, the final solutions, is a foundation of white fragility.
Excuse me, there's probably some Fed or somebody from the ADL listening in on this right now who's just about to send an email to YouTube about how awful we are. So I can't believe you did that to us, Jim Dewey. We're going to be suffering now.
Well, I mean, I should have said in Minecraft to hedge my bets, but they don't even have to use the phrase in Minecraft when they talk about demographic replacement and outright genocide. But continuing on. In other words, for D'Angelo, the whole point is the suffering. And note, the scare quotes around solutions, as if wanting such a thing were somehow ridiculous.
You need to suffer and you're going to like it.
Yeah, you need to sit here and self-flagellate. A corollary question is why black people need to be treated the way D'Angelo assumes we do. The very assumption is deeply condescending to all proud black people. Man, can you imagine if something could be deeply condescending to all proud white people? No,
that doesn't happen.
In my life, racism has affected me now and then at the margins in very occasional social ways, but has no effect on my access to societal resources. If anything, it has made them more available to me than they would have been otherwise. I'm happy that he's at least willing to admit that.
Mm-hmm.
Nor should anyone dismiss me as Rara Avis.
I need to look that up. You keep reading. I'll look up what the hell that means.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's Latin, but being middle class, upwardly mobile, and black has been quite common during my existence since the mid-1960s.
Okay, rara avis means a rare or unique person or thing. So something rare, something unique.
The more you know. Well, it's decreasingly rare as the years go on. Just ask the 2020 census. And to deny this is to assert the affirmative action for black people did not work. In 2020, as opposed to 1920, I neither need nor want anyone to muse on how whiteness privileges them over me. Nor do I need wider society to undergo teachings on how to be exquisitely sensitive about my feelings. I see no connection between D'Angelo's brand of re-education and vigorous constructive activism in the real world on issues of import to the black community. And I cannot imagine that any black readers could willingly submit themselves to D'Angelo's ideas while considering themselves adults of ordinary self-regard and Few books about race have more openly infantilized black people than this supposedly authoritative tome, or simply dehumanized us. D'Angelo preaches that Black History Month errs in that it takes whites out of the equation, which means that it doesn't focus enough on racism. We can't focus enough on racism. Claims like this get a rise out of a certain kind of room, but apparently D'Angelo wants Black History Month to consist of glum recitations of white perfidy. This would surely help assuage D'Angelo's sense of complicity in our problems, but does she consider what a slog this gloomy, knit-browed festivus of a holiday would be for actual black people? Too much. Yeah, imagine how it would affect black people. That's the takeaway here.
Yeah, exactly. And you can skip the rest of this article because he talks about it. But we got the meat and potatoes of it. Where he criticized how wretched and awful it is. And to think that, along with Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist book, the fact that those books sold as much as they did is, just like many things in our world today, a black pill. Yet another.
Well, and one thing I think that would be appropriate now to tackle next is the Black Lives Matter crash course.
Yes, let's do something. We're going to do something more interesting, guys. Don't worry, watching the video.
Yeah, I see that Andrew Norman is...
Andrew Norman was about to nuke our chat with NSFW porn if we didn't start getting more interesting. So we got to heed his...
We're going to continue on. The mention of Black History Month is a good segue, so... I don't know if you guys remember Crash Course history, but when I was a kid, this was something that when teachers were feeling particularly lazy, they would put on the projector to teach you instead of having to do it themselves. Now, I was expecting John Green, the normal host, to be hosting this, but we instead get this guy. Now,
that's probably like Deshaun Green, maybe. Jonathan, probably.
Yeah, Desquarius Green.
Desquarius Green Jr., East-West Bowl.
Yeah, but so we're blind reacting to this just as an aside, so bear with us. But we're gonna dig into it here.
Hi, I'm Clint Smith.
Clint Smith.
Of course, Black American history.
I don't think the audio is working.
Are you sure? It might just be quiet.
I'm not getting anything at all.
That might be a Discord thing.
I'm sorry to tell you.
Stream settings, stream quality. Let's see.
Learning about the origins of the Black Lives Matter.
Sadly, no.
Interesting. Okay, bear with us. Please.
Our condolences, everybody. Yes, please stand by. Are you going to put up the Fallout 4 thing?
Yeah, that's what I've got up right now. Actually, as a matter of fact. Is the audio coming through on our actual stream? Can anyone in chat tell me?
Right, because I guess if I can't hear it, that's my problem. But I feel like if I can't, then not everyone, then nobody else can either.
Well, I've got you routed through Discord. They should be off of my... Yeah, I'm...
That's a little different.
Yeah. Let me see. Sources.
If anybody has any cringe videos that they want people to react to, you can just pop them in the chat if you feel like it. Obviously, we can't do every one, but I think there's enough people in the chat who might actually be possible to at some point.
We got watching right now.
Like 7, but that might be me among them.
Yeah. Can anyone hear? Anyone in the chat? Are you able to hear? Because there are subtitles, so we may be able to just limp along if you can't hear it. But
right. Anyone, help if they could hear anything. Your help would be appreciated. Are we gonna have to start giving out like reverse super chats to get people involved?
Well, here I'll pull it up on my own phone here.
Okay.
Let's see. We'll figure out what the delay is.
Andrew Norman
says he can hear.
But what can you hear? I mean, you can hear our voice, But what about the video?
Let me scroll back and I'll be able to find out in 2 seconds.
Speaking of Andrew Norman, though, I can't remember which movie he directed, but the movie director named Norman Jewison is not a Jew, if you can believe that.
All right. Let's see here.
So they can hear, but they can't hear any video. What Tristan
It's coming
Wintle
through on the
said.
stream. The video is coming through on stream. I did just confirm that myself.
So Finn and Tristan said they can't hear the vid, just you guys.
Well, the vid is off right now.
Right. So maybe we have to play it and see if they can hear.
All right. Well,
If they're capable.
February 26, 2012, Trayvon Martin, an unarmed Black American teen, was walking home from a convenience store.
It's going now.
There's
There's captions.
when he was fatally shot by George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch volunteer. After police in Florida decided not to arrest Zimmerman, the case sparked international protests and debates about racial profiling, racial violence, and self-defense laws. Zimmerman was later charged with second-degree murder in the killing of Martin.
Oh, it would also help if I
He was
transition
also
back to desktop.
later acquitted.
Okay, they can hear the
Yeah. Oh, they can?
In the
Okay, good for
subsequent
them.
weeks after the acquittal,
All right. Well, we may want to. Well, he's just talking about.
murder in the killing of Martin. But he was also
Yeah, go right ahead.
later acquitted of the charges. In the subsequent weeks after the acquittal, there were nationwide protests.
Okay, but he was acquitted of a jury of his peers, and it's been some time since the Trayvon Martin case. So it's not so familiar in my mind, but as I understand it, Trayvon Martin was the aggressor in some way. He assaulted
Honoring
Zimmerman.
Martin's life and legacy.
Right, and I have some
2013,
polling data on
3
how
Black
people saw
organizers.
the verdict. Like, this is Pew Research Center, July 2013. Independents said 42 to 37 that they were satisfied with the verdict. And then white independents said 50 to 28 they were satisfied. Whites 49 to 30 were satisfied with the verdict. You could say that's because white people are biased, but I think that's... And then you had about 1 out of 5 people who just didn't know. And then, of course, the Democrats and those who identified as white Democrats took very strong issue with it. But on the merits of the case itself, compared to other more gray area, ambiguous ones like Laquan McDonald or Philando Castile, this one was pretty open and shut. Like, this one was pretty straightforward.
Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Ayo Temeti created a racial justice organization building on what had become the popular social media hashtag Black Lives Matter in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman. Their work, alongside the work of Black activists across the country, some of whom were formerly affiliated with the organization and some of whom had been doing racial justice work in their communities for years, helped spur a social movement that spread across the world and has shaped the
I would like to point out how white the faces in
whom
that
had been
crowd
doing
were.
racial justice work in their communities.
Yeah, I do see that.
That spread across the world.
Okay, so we
shaped the
got...
fight for racial.
Because I saw White America Wake Up, and I first thought, whoa, is that a rare identitarian with a sign out there in public? But no.
Justice,
Don't get your hopes up.
Not the
economic
way you're
equality,
thinking.
and gender
No.
equity over the past decade. Today, we're going to dive
Wait, why were they protesting in Mexico? Did you see
justice,
that?
economic
Athens,
equality,
Greece,
and gender equity.
Yeah, no,
Tijuana,
it-
Baja,
over the past
California.
Well, same thing in
We're gonna
2020,
dive-
where there was all these worldwide protests about the death of George Floyd. Everyone just decided to get on the act.
Into how the
Yeah, and it's interesting to me too that like the people most likely to virtue signal are the people who have the least contact with these types.
Black Lives Matter movement spread worldwide and inspired a generational swell of activism that continues to this day. Let's start the show. After the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012, another episode of anti-Black violence gained national and international attention. On August 9, 2014, 18-year-old Michael
Okay, pause. Anti-Black violence. Okay, and this one, this is another pristine case of the cop, Darren Wilson, didn't do anything wrong. But there's no racist reason this happened other than the fact that a black person was killed, therefore it's anti-black. So is Darrell Brooks guilty of anti-white violence then? By that logic, he is, unless you, for some deranged, stupid, and endlessly retarded reason, think that Michael Brown was killed because he was black.
Well, and if memory serves too, Darrell Brooks did post on social media like very anti-white things, and it never got mentioned.
There you go.
It never got mentioned.
Was shot and killed by police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. The details of Brown's death and the aftermath were hotly disputed.
And that hands up, I paused at the wrong time.
Yeah, that was a lie too.
Hands up, don't shoot is a lie too. Every single time they claim it was an unarmed black man, they end up having a gun or a knife or at least reaching for something. Like I've never found a confirmed case of hands up, don't shoot, shooting unarmed black men.
Well, and the other thing is, it literally just didn't happen. Like, I'm going to put the For Pinocchio Washington Post fact check article in the chat. Let me know if people can access it. It's a lie. Like, it's unambiguously wrong, a lie. Some might remember in 2014, the St. Louis Rams football players got out of the tunnel and they did the hands up, don't shoot thing. Or that could have been the I can't breathe. I might be conflating it. But again, it's just wrong. It's just BS. And if this idiot who's doing the presentation is doing his due diligence at all, which I'm certain he's not, he would at least have the balls to point that out.
Well, and I think it's important to remember, too, like, Crash Course knows good and well that they are nationwide, at least here in the United States, in classrooms. Like, the point here isn't to educate, the point is to inculcate. And so they're going to be, they're just going to willfully ignore facts. Like, the running joke has always been, hi, I'm John Green, and today I'm going to willfully misinterpret history to fit into my niche brand of liberalism. Like, that's even when we were in middle school. Like, it was painfully obvious.
Just like that one. It still makes me cringe to this day. One of his early Crash Course videos about how the Second Amendment only applies to muskets.
Yeah, that's
like you are an irredeemable shitlib. Like, I could talk to you for 4 hours and nothing would get through your head.
Well, and there's extensive writings on how, like, the founding fathers, and you know, the opinion of the founding fathers is what it is. Like, I don't know that it's sacrosanct, you know what I mean? But there's extensive writings at the time about how the people need to be, like, armed to stand toe to toe with a European nation. Like, privateers were private. They had cannons. They had black powder. Like, they were almost as well as equipped as European fighting forces. And that was the point, because you need to be able to not hunt, not defend your home, but to defend really yourselves and your posterity from tyranny. That was the idea here.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to see, could you go back like five? Well, actually, we'll see how he covers this issue, because what he initially used, the verbiage, was there was a lot of controversy about it. And it's like, no, we know what happened. We know he wasn't murdered. We know the cop didn't do basically anything wrong. But then you're muddying the waters by saying it was complicated, right? What happened at Auschwitz-Birkenau was complicated. We don't really know what happened there, right? It was we don't really know what happened in the World Trade Center. You know, just there was an explosion, and it was complicated. It was controversial.
And I get sick of that sophistry too, especially in history. Like, it's such a malleable thing. Nobody will ever know what exactly happened, and it's just so frustrating, because that's what happens is, like, years after the fact, some historian is going to revise the common understanding of what occurred to fit, you know, the political topic du jour.
And it's a total cop-out. Like, if he was unambiguously murdered, Crash Course would definitely make great pains to say that. Like, they would make very sure that is communicated to the watcher of the video. But because they can't say that, they got to muddy the waters. It's kind of like with the Rolling Stone story about the rape on University of Virginia campus about 8 years ago, where the writer of the article...
beds around campus?
No, that was a different one. Another bullshit rape hoax. You know, it's hard to keep track of them all. But the other one, the writer of that article, who got sued for libel and for about $1.5 million, said on a podcast, well, maybe we'll never know what happened on that night. you go from accusing someone of gang rape to, I don't know, we'll never know what happened.
Well, like, and effectively, like, indebting them to another person forever. Like, they have to be able to sustain some sort of a living. If you're going to, I don't know exactly what the judgment was against this person for libel, but usually it's $1 gazillion. Like, you've financially ruined this person, and you've ruined their reputation such that they probably will not be able to get a halfway decent job.
Oh, we got B. Williams in the chat. Surprised y'all didn't add without B. Williams like y'all said. You're right. I did say we'd do that, but we didn't. So what have I missed? Okay.
Well, you should have been here.
You can rewatch the stream when it's over.
All right.
The details of Brown's death and the aftermath were hotly disputed.
Yeah.
With some claiming that Wilson had used unnecessary force on Brown, and others defending Wilson as just doing his job.
And even in their, like, how they characterize the defense of just, they're putting words in the mouth of the defenders of Darren Wilson as just doing his job, not, no, that was an appropriate amount of force.
Right. No, that's true. That is another bullshit way to frame it, where it's like taken as a given that force that can be considered unnecessary happened, which I'm sure the standard for these people as to what unnecessary force is ever killing a black guy ever. Like, obviously, that's how their mind tends to function. But again, it's not that he was doing his job, strictly speaking. It's that the 6'8", 290-pound motherfucker was charging at him after Darren Wilson told him to stop where he was.
Well, in the minds of these people, too, we mentioned it earlier. Justice in their minds is allowing them to do whatever the hell they want because they're black and you're white. Like, so if you take any corrective action, you address any sort of criminality, and you're white, they're black, or even, I don't know if you recall, I mean, there's been a lot going on in Wisconsin the last 2 years or so, but there was, there was a shooting at a mall in Wisconsin, and it was a black police officer. Let me pull it up here. It was a black police officer who ended up shooting and killing a black teen, and BLM protesters came to his and his girlfriend's house and shot a shotgun through his doors.
What the hell?
It was Officer Mensa's shooting. Yeah.
No one is safe. No one is safe. You cannot kill black people. That's just a violation of the sacred text, wherever it's written. Don't kill black guys ever.
Yeah, this is the cop that shot and killed. So the long and short of it, because I don't want to bore these people with another article, but the long and short of it is I think he was shoplifting from the mall is what it was, or some other petty crime, and he pulls out a gun and shoots at this black cop who returns fire and kills him. And he ended up not staying at his own house because there were threats made against his life, and they found out where his girlfriend lived and then came to his house and protested outside for weeks.
So the cop didn't just decide one morning, I'm going to shoot a black guy, and then he just did it for no reason? You're telling me that he was fired at first after the bastard who opened fire had just shoplifted?
Well, and that's the thing, too. We talked about it earlier. I mean, these people will always protect their own, and if you deviate from protecting your own, or even if there's the perception that you have not stood in solidarity with the black race as a black man, they will immediately throw you under the bus as an Uncle Tom.
Yep.
There were also allegations that Brown had potentially participated in a robbery shortly before the shooting occurred.
Allegations?
It was on camera.
Did we just see that? Did we just see that?
There's camera footage that he had just participated. And what do you mean participated in a robbery? That's, I mean, again, the sophistry here. He committed a crime. He committed armed robbery. You could say he allegedly committed armed robbery, but even then, we've got the time-stamped camera footage. That's him.
No, how about this? Okay, I'll take you, Jim Dewey. I'll take B. Williams. I'll put you in a room. And then I'll live stream myself on my phone, pulling out a Glock and capping both of you guys. And then I'll make sure to tell Crash Course, by the way, it's an allegation that I shot you guys. Allegedly, I did.
The shooting occurred. What isn't under dispute, though, is that Michael Brown's body was left in the street after he was killed for more than
You know good and well, if they had touched his body, they would have accused these police officers of trying to hide evidence.
Oh, of course.
And that's kind of SOP. You wait for the coroner. You wait and collect evidence. Like, what do they want? What would have been justice here in this instance?
Well, yeah, okay, so I'm wondering, because obviously I don't know everything inside and out about this. What was communicated and conveyed to us was that the cop shot him and just kind of fucking left him there until 4 hours later someone decided to do something about it. But what probably actually happened was Darren Wilson was like, holy Christ, I just shot a guy. Better bring in some backup. Better bring in the coroner. And then you leave the body there to collect evidence, and you can, report what happened. But for some curious reason, they decided to leave that out.
Well, and, I'm not a cop. I've never been a cop. But, yeah, it would be interesting to know what standard operating procedure in a murder is, or even just a police-involved shooting. Like, what is the average time for moving of a body? And why is this even, I don't understand what they're driving at, even. Like,
well, they want you to think that people are
in his corpse, like where they sitting around, like pissing on his body.
No, people were so apathetic towards the poor black guy that they just left him there.
I'm trying to see if look. There's a black cop right here. At least he looks black to me. I don't know. It's kind of grainy, but is he doing a racism too?
Probably.
4 hours.
Apparently, if you're black and you shoot a black guy, you can still be racist.
And across the world, saw as further compounding the injustice.
No true black
the
man.
Tragedy. In Ferguson, protests following Brown's death began peacefully and then became progressively more intense and included a militarized response from law enforcement. Journalists.
I love how they're characterizing that too, like a militarized response. And I'm not necessarily for the militarization of a police force, but in this instance, you've got a violent mob. Yeah. I mean, you may want to prepare to protect the community.
No. What happened with Rodney King in LA in 1992 didn't actually happen. You don't need a militarized police force for any occasion because black people aren't violent.
Yeah, South Africa doesn't exist. Don't look into that at all. Also, the LA riots were just a one-off event. Don't look into anything before or after that point in terms of large-scale black rioting.
Baltimore was a one-off too. There was 2 one-offs.
I remember that. I remember when the riots were so bad that, I forget which sports team had to play in an empty stadium. They weren't letting people in.
That was Baltimore, I believe. There was the Orioles MLB game.
Yeah. B. Williams says, on-site forensics takes a while, and you don't want to disturb the scene whatsoever, so the wait time is perfectly reasonable to me. Yeah, I think we're on the same page with that one. Like, that seems reasonable to not touch the body for a while.
Residents, protesters, and bystanders were often swept up in the response. Demonstrators resumed with fresh intensity in November 2014.
Demonstrators. One thing I want to point out, too, and I don't know if they even analyzed this picture this closely. It just caught my eye. Dude right here is wearing a ski mask. What do you think his intentions are? It's the middle of the day. It's in summer.
Now, I think that could just be a woman wearing a hijab.
Oh, is that? It's kind of.
It could be a Muslim woman. That's what I see.
Were often swept up in the response.
1 in chat for Muslim woman, 2 in chat for black dude wearing a ski mask. We'll settle this.
Demonstrators resumed with fresh intensity in November 2014 when a grand jury decided not to indict Officer Wilson in the shooting, and then again in 2015.
And they never talk about the racial makeup of these, juries or grand juries. And I know that's supposed to be secret, but you're trying to tell me that, they can't find out, especially when jury members are allowed to talk to the press after the fact. I guarantee you that they would have found out if it were somehow an all-white jury of their peers. You know what I mean? And they would be doubling down on that one. But furthermore, the system is working. If you don't like trial by jury, then you need a different system. I don't know what to do.
No, they should have done what they did with Derek Chauvin. They should have basically just did a show trial where they hung him afterwards.
That's the direction it's going, is just kangaroo court.
Yep.
When the United States Department of Justice announced they would not charge Wilson for violating federal civil rights law. These protests...
Now imagine this.
He violated... On what grounds do you make that claim?
They would not charge him for violating. Now that's the weird part, is it's like saying that I'm not going to charge you for murdering my wife. It's like, well, you didn't do it, so of course you're not going to charge him for it.
Well, that's my point. That's what I'm driving at is, like, what grounds do you have to believe that he violated federal civil rights law? A grand jury who happens to know more about the case than you do in your 5 minutes of reading Twitter headlines.
Also true. But what's left out here, too, is that the head of the DOJ, as you know, is the Attorney General. I believe the Attorney General this time was Eric Holder, a black Democrat man. For those who find that interesting.
These protests weren't just limited to Ferguson, but spread across the country and across the world. In the wake of Wilson's hearing, activists organized a national action which became known as the Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, activists.
That's right. To support
there's a lot of money behind this stuff, too.
Local protesters, and also to build coalitions that would continue racial justice work in their hometowns once they returned. This effort was part of a tradition of black activism that built on the famous freedom rides of the 1960s, when young activists from across the country rode buses into the South to protest segregation.
Okay, pause for a sec.
Yeah, you go first.
So, funny they mentioned the Freedom Riders, because I'm looking for a poll I found from a while back. So, this is a PDF link from Gallup, May 1961, where those who they asked whether they approve or disapprove of what the Freedom Riders are doing, those who knew of them and their purpose disapproved 61 to 22. So it was not a popular thing they were doing. Obviously, it's been enshrined as some endlessly noble thing they did, but most people were not happy about it.
Well, and they don't even bother to try and examine the ramifications of, desegregation, and then it just as quickly went the other direction. Like, all of a sudden, once blacks are integrated in schools, now it's just anti-white racism that's keeping the blacks down because they have to be around whites in school. I mean, it's just
yeah.
Over 600 people participated.
Do you have any information, because I'm not so up on the Freedom Riders, who was funding this?
Oh, well, I'm sure it was definitely people of Irish persuasion who was funneling them all that money, undoubtedly.
Fellow white people.
And the Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, fellow
white. The
death
death of Michael Brown, Black Lives Matter continued to grow and spread across social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The hashtag was used as an organizing tool meant to both defend the black community against state-sanctioned violence and also to affirm the dignity.
State-sanctioned violence?
Against
who in the United States government on any level is like, yep, bag 'em and tag 'em, boys.
That's what they think, though. And the debate that I hope we get around to tomorrow night with B. Williams, where you got actual justice warrior arguing with Nick Cruz, the socialist black dude, you'll get a lot of that. You're going to get an earful of that.
Beauty and humanity of black people in a world that so often seemed to do the opposite. Another case that gained a lot of attention came in July 2014 when several bystanders used their cell phones to capture footage of Officer Daniel Pantaleo murdering 43-year-old Eric Garner by choking him to death, despite Garner's repeated pleas of "I can't breathe." Garner's...
You probably know more about that one than I do since you mentioned his name, but I'm a little skeptical of that claim.
Exactly.
I can tell you, I'm not trying to dox myself here, but I did work security while I was in college at a pretty rough property. And from time to time, we did put people into cuffs. And that is the first thing. Well, after yelling at you for being racist because you dared to stop them from shoplifting, that is the first thing they will scream when you put them into cuffs is they can't breathe, even if they're like on their feet. Like it, and I feel like people fail to realize that it's such a common thing that people scream that it's the boy who cried wolf, even if it were true, and it never is. There's a such thing called positional restraint asphyxiation, where yes, you can suffocate if you're cuffed and left on your stomach for long periods of time, but it's very rare, and that's clearly not what happened here. It's not what happened with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin or anybody else that these chuckleheads are protesting about.
Killing
B. Williams says George Floyd was the reincarnation of Eric Garner. I suppose the toxicology report on Eric Garner would
gain particular
confirm or deny
notoriety.
that one.
Because one, the offense he was being held for, selling loose cigarettes, was so minor and not at all commensurate with the police response. Two,
okay, so because a this is what we were talking about yesterday offline, is like, it's sort of like the free rider problem, right? If you've got a set of laws that's not going to be enforced, you very rapidly lose the rule of law. And just because an offense is what you perceive to be minor doesn't mean that it doesn't warrant a police response to enforce.
Yeah.
he had been previously harassed
And what does this mean, previously harassed? And I have a
by the
sneaking suspicion that he escalated the situation, that minor police
NYPD.
incident,
And
for
three,
selling loose
because
cigarettes.
Pantaleo...
Right. I already just know that was the case.
I've watched enough body cam footage to know that happened.
chokehold to detain him.
What's this illegal chokehold?
Maybe it was a banned practice by that police department. The weird part is, okay, you can't use you can't put your knee on the neck. Okay, you can't do that. You can't use an illegal chokehold either. I'm just wondering, well, how much are you left with to restrain someone who obviously doesn't want to get arrested? And I'm sure if these people had their way, if these shittards had their way, you don't do anything. You just let them go.
Well, I mean, especially if they're the aggressor too. Like if you're in danger of, loss of life, limb, or other great bodily harm, there should be no illegal chokehold. Like, I don't have to let myself die because you decided you wanted to fight me for trying to stop you from selling loose cigarettes.
Now, that's true
officer...
under the premise that your life was relatively in danger. You got human SVD in the chat saying, man, Eric Garner's a bit iffy for me. It was against policy.
Admittedly, I don't know enough about Eric Garner in particular.
Right, same here.
Many of these incidents, and perhaps we could do a deep dive.
We could.
Later.
Yeah, we definitely could. Yeah, we could get actual Justice Warrior. Well, he'll probably never associate with us, but he looks into these kinds of cases regularly.
Watched or held Garner down. This led to another round of protests in New York and across the country, which further ignited the fervor of the Black Lives Matter movement. The names of black men and women who were victims of extrajudicial killings and police violence.
Where's the names of the men and, the white men and women who are victims of black violence on a regular basis? They don't ever make it into the news. Do you know any of the victims of Darrell Brooks? Like, seriously, does anyone know any of their names?
One of them was a kid. At least one of them was a kid, too. You can bet your shiny bottom ass that if he was a black kid, everyone would know his name.
Every single one of those people. Or like that screen cap that floats around with a black man just shot a white kid in the head and it never made mainstream news. I don't know if you've seen that one. But
I don't think I've seen that incident. Of course not.
Soon became synonymous with the movement. Names like Tamir Rice, Tanisha Anderson, Maya Hall, Walter Scott, Renisha McBride. Alton
Okay,
Sterling.
stop. Tamir Rice. I actually know a bit about this one. It was bad that it happened, but when the cops were called on Tamir Rice, because he had a toy gun, if I'm not mistaken, he spray painted it. So he was just kind of fucking around with what looked like a gun, and then the person who called the police then said, I don't know, the gun kind of looks fake, but could someone come over? However, my understanding is the cops who went on the scene were not told that information about it possibly being a toy gun. And then the cop who then shot Tamir Rice said he feels really, really bad about it and has not been the same since then.
Human SVD says, but having taken use of force training before, you have to take into account totality of the circumstances. Choking will lead to death. Yeah, I mean, I've taken use of force training before, too. I mean, choking can lead to death. It may even be likely to lead to death or great bodily harm. But again, I would concur. You have to take into account the totality of the circumstances. And I'm not really really willing to speak too much further on it without having done my research. But again, I'm just going with my gut says on that one.
Who was on drugs?
What's up?
Sorry, SVD. Who was on drugs? It was a neighbor. Was he talking about the Tamir Rice
Yeah,
case?
no, he's talking about what I mentioned with the screen cap that floats around with. It was a kid in North Carolina who was 5, and his name was Hennant. It was a neighbor,
Okay.
his black neighbor, like shot him point blank in the back of the head and was likely on drugs. Though I don't
I
know
got
that like being on drugs is a mitigating factor. I'm not sure that's what you're intimating there, but like nobody forced you to shoot up with heroin or whatever. Finn Wraith says there were also white men who were shot by the police for minor reason, like Duncan Lemp, who was shot while sleeping because the police had a search warrant to search his home, but there was no massive outrage. And I don't want to come off as a bootlicker here either. There are instances in which, there's a certain type of personality that's attracted to sort of the petty authority that comes with being a police officer. I've seen a lot of bad body camera footage too, where it's just some dickhead cop trying to flex on somebody at a traffic stop. But, I don't want to be put into the position where I'm defending all police just because I'm saying that, the BLM claims here are bullshit.
Right. Now, B. Williams, was this the kid that got killed for accidentally getting on the sea? I disavow that comment, B. Williams. You ought to be ashamed of yourself for using such racialist and inflammatory language. How
Please
dare
go
you?
report yourself to the SPLC.
Yep. And the ADL while you're at it.
All right, continuing on. Yeah, to your point, yes, that is who we are referring to.
Sandra Bland became linked to the Black Lives Matter movement.
Oh, and by the way,
Names
Sandra
became
Bland.
relevant.
Do you want to know who killed Sandra Bland?
I've never even heard that name before, truth be known.
Sandra Bland killed her. That's what happened. She killed herself.
Go on.
It was a while since I looked at the circumstances. I think she might have been getting supposedly the runaround when she was in jail. She was pulled over for some kind of traffic violation. Then she eventually got arrested. But the point is throwing in something like Sandra Bland because she killed herself in jail.
Yes, even Wikipedia says it was ruled a suicide.
So the fact that, okay, there you go. Nice. Not hanging in a jail cell. Ruled a suicide.
I doubt we'll get to it tonight. Maybe we can save that for tomorrow's stream about the Wikipedia stuff. But if Wikipedia is allowing this to be up, I'm certain that it was just pretty cut and dry.
Right. So again, just putting Sandra Bland and Tamir Rice, where you got all these shades of gray and factors like the fact that black person wasn't killed by a cop. And they're just all said as if there's no distinction between the two, as if they're just all the same. As if they're all just equally unjust, or they all meet the unjust threshold. It's like, no, they don't.
Well, and I mean, they hope if they throw enough shit at the wall, some of it will stick.
Oh, yeah.
Too. So it's
Yep.
like, because I'm telling you, if I haven't heard of a lot of these names and you haven't heard of some of them, most people.
I've heard of Alton Sterling, but Renisha McBride, I've not heard of that one. And
I've
not
heard of
Tanisha
Maya
Anderson
Hall
or Maya
for
Hall.
sure.
Walter Scott, that's
The
another
only one I
famous
heard of was Tamir Rice.
Yeah.
Cries for justice. The Black Lives Matter hashtag and on-the-ground organizing work
400 years of slavery and still no justice. I think there's another group you might want to take up with that one, but
that emerged from it helped move the conversation forward about multiple forms.
is there some reason the A is missing here? Is there like a political point to that?
That would be black culture at its finest.
Of violence, both systemic and interpersonal, that impacted black people. Organizers and activists were quick to point out that the violence people were seeing on their phones and television screens wasn't new, but was simply being captured more often because of the prevalence of camera phones and social media platforms where those videos could be shared. Put differently,
I don't know. They rioted just fine with the LA riots, but
And two things to that. One, you could say the same about black on white violence or black on white crime, where not a lot of that gets recorded. Doesn't get talked about a lot.
It's not like technological advancement is some sort of this agent of white supremacy.
And then I think what was the second thing I was trying to think of? And some of the cell phone videos are just bullshit because they don't capture the full context of what happened.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that is intentional. You can tell that they're
Oh,
intentionally cutting large chunks of it out, and that's why, I mean, it's pretty wise of police departments to proliferate body cams.
yeah,
The
I'm
violence
pro body camera.
was
And initially, the weird part is there were initially a lot of cops who didn't want body cams, which struck me as odd. But one of them told me too that part of the issue is all that becomes public domain, and then, like, obviously, a lot of times when police are seeing people, it's in their own home at their lowest moments, and that can be embarrassing to say the least. So,
Sure.
wasn't novel, but the technology to amplify the violence was. Black people had witnessed police brutality and violence in their communities for generations. For many, like my parents and grandparents, the images they saw emerging out of Ferguson and New York and Baltimore were reminiscent of what they had seen during the civil rights movement in cities like Birmingham, Greensboro, and Selma. It's also important to note that the deaths that get the most attention
I think that they sort of diminish in making an equivalency between the civil rights movement and the BLM movement. They're sort of diminishing what was going on in the South. Now, we can debate the merits of Jim Crow at a later date, but I mean, those are like being excluded, or rather white people actively selecting not to associate with you and having that be legal is not equivalent to, like, you got shot and killed for chimping out at a traffic stop.
True.
and the names that served as rallying cries for the movement over the years were only a small fraction of the total number of Black people subjected to police violence. Between January 2015 and April 2022, 1,593 Black Americans were shot and killed by on-duty police officers.
How many white Americans were shot and killed by blacks during that same
Well,
time
that
frame?
or just white people killed by cops. It's a very, very funny thing that happens where I think Ryan calls this the leftist impulse to suddenly not understand statistics. Where if you bring up things like terrorism, or back in the day when that was more of a thing with Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, where they talk
people
about
point out-
since 2001. But
Well, I mean, there's that where like I say, hey, that about 1% of the United States is Muslim, but they're responsible for, I can't remember, either 26% of the terrorist deaths or the 26% of terrorist incidents. And then they spit back at you this banal and vapid bullshit but the vast majority of them are done by white people, or the vast majority of them are done by far-right extremists. And then what if you're to do that in this case, where they say, look at all these disproportionate number of Black people who have been killed by cops. And then would it be fair for me to then say right back at them, okay, but the vast majority of those killed by police are white people, so therefore your point doesn't count.
yeah,
Like you see how that's not consistent. And again, the reason they're not consistent is because they're trying to advance a certain narrative. White people are bad, brown people are good. Go get shouted at.
Black Americans make up less than 13% of the U.S. population, but the rate at which they are shot and killed by police
well, that's one half of that statistic.
That doesn't count, though. That doesn't
I
count.
was looking at the chat and I heard 13%, and I turned over and I was wondering if they were going to look at my other monitor, and I was wondering if they were going to use that
I think
statistic somehow.
we're a
But
little.
I mean, even if they're killed at double the rate of white Americans, that's still not proportionate. you know?
Well, yeah,
It's
based
still
on
not proportionate to the level of criminality.
and how much Black people kill cops as well.
Exactly. B. Williams says, remember when they made the Hispanic cop whiter with photo editing? I was under the impression that was kind of...
Was that George Zimmerman? Probably. I don't think he was a cop.
I know they did
George
that
Zimmerman
with George
was white.
Zimmerman, but...
White Hispanic. He was white Hispanic.
Yeah, that's another tactic they'll pull, but I know the mainstream... I've seen multiple photos from multiple different instances where they pull that stuff. I want to say they even did that with Darrell Brooks at first, but that's not important enough that I can be fucked to go look it up. Human SVD says military MPs are held to a higher standard. I will plead the fifth on that one. Like I said, they have broken homes, which leads to higher crimes. In part, yes. But I would argue, and that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. That is certainly not the lion's share of the reason.
As Ryan would say, that's another topic for another time.
Is double the rate of white Americans. The protests across the country pushed cities and the Department of Justice to begin various investigations into state-sanctioned violence, police misconduct, mass incarceration, and other forms of violence inflicted upon the black community.
Again, I'm just floored that they continue to lay mass incarceration at the feet of white people. And one of the things, too, like, we probably won't get to their war on drugs video tonight just because this is going on 2 hours at this point. But,
yeah.
You know, one of the things they'll point to when they talk about assault weapons bans within the context of, you know, the United States is they'll say, well, look, after the 1994 assault weapons ban and after the sunset of that piece of legislation in 2004, you know, the crime rate both declined and then increased slightly. But they don't want to talk about that same time frame really correlates pretty well with what's commonly known as the war on drugs. And then when that started becoming a political faux pas to support. But I mean, my contention would be if you don't want to be incarcerated, maybe you shouldn't commit offenses, which would lead to that being the inevitable conclusion.
Yeah, but one thing to build off of that, it kind of bugs me whenever shitlibs look at the topic of gun control and gun violence, but they don't use a properly racial lens. Like, first off, here's why the gun violence thing in America is not really a problem. You take the 40,000 deaths due to guns, 60% of them right off the bat are suicides. Yes, that's bad, and yes, you're more likely to die from suicide if you use a gun, but that's not what I think of when I think of a gun violence problem. Okay, that's a suicide problem. That's a mental health problem that needs to be addressed. So now you're left with 16,000.
They don't want to, not to interrupt, but they don't want to talk about the demographic that is disproportionately affected by suicide.
Oh, right, yeah. Right, now we can't be victim to anything bad. And then you break down who commits gun violence. Well, if you were to believe some of these shitlibs, I don't know how many of them, would think that, you know, dumb rednecks out there shooting each other in trailer parks or where this violence happens. Because gun ownership rates are highest among white people, particularly white people in rural areas. That's who owns the guns. And you go to urban areas and suburban areas have the lowest rates of firearm ownership according to Pew Research data. But where does all the crime happen? It happens with black people shooting other black people in cities. Right? Black men shooting each other in cities is where all the gun violence happens. So that's the gun control problem. Right. When people autistically say, oh, well, the assault weapon ban, we need to ban more guns. It's like, well, okay, if you actually wanted to fix the problem, you could just not give black men guns ever in cities, and it would go down quite a bit.
Right. But good luck furthering that piece of legislation.
Within the criminal legal system, investigations by the Department of Justice and others revealed horrifying and widespread patterns of police harassment and abuse of power. For example, the DOJ
Like, what in their mind constitutes police harassment? Like, is any interaction with a police officer when you're committing a crime police harassment? Like, am I being harassed if I get pulled over for speeding?
Investigation.
I mean,
of the police department and court system.
they're qualitative or they're a subjective interpretation of getting harassed. I think Sean Miles did a good video on this about lived experience and how that's not good evidence of anything. People in their eyewitness recollections of things are generally wrong. That's why you don't trust it. That's why it's so sketchy to admit that thing as evidence in court. And so I don't know how, so we could be a little ignorant of how the investigation was done or how the report was compiled. But like, we have reason to doubt that black people themselves are not the most trustworthy to whether they feel like they're being harassed or repressed. So, you know, press X to doubt whenever you can.
Yeah, and I remember Ryan had a good video too on sort of the attitudes and opinions of slaves after the Civil War, after the 13th Amendment, and they didn't know they were oppressed. The long and short of it, but
with 67% black, almost 90% of the documented cases where police officers used force were against black people. Their report demonstrated how black people in Ferguson were being disproportionately targeted and subjected to police violence.
Or, disproportionately criminal. Like, I don't understand how they're making that leap.
Well, I mean, there could be truth to what the report is saying, but it's kind of pathetic how studiously they avoid the criminal element of the quote unquote disproportionate policing. Like, they're making goddamn sure to not mention the criminality aspect. These darn cracker cops being so mean to these poor black people, man. That's the problem, apparently.
Were against black people. Their report demonstrated how black people in Ferguson were being disproportionately targeted and subjected to police violence. This report also showed that the police and courts...
Okay, real quick, too. This isn't exactly what I was looking for, but this is sort of similar. That's kind of why I was spending a considerable amount of time trying to find this here, but obviously my search results are curated. But this is the firearm homicide rate per 100,000. I mean, you look at U.S. white versus other countries with pretty heavy gun control laws on the books, versus U.S. Hispanic and U.S. black. And I feel like there's too much focus on this and not enough focus on this, especially with the demographic trends going on. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, could you possibly send that graph to me?
Yeah, sure. I'll
that'd be cool.
Here. I really don't like that there's an iFunny watermark on it. I'm sure on my
often
phone
work
I've
together
got it saved.
to use traffic arrests.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I don't care.
Imprisonment of African Americans to raise revenue for the city, often in direct
I'll
violation
put in the chat
of those citizens'
data
14th Amendment rights.
So
to put it
people know
more
I'm not
directly,
making stuff up.
police
B. Williams just finished dinner
were
and fried some new
incentivized
Heb sushi,
to
man.
pull
That's every piece had a wad of wasabi on it. Well, I'm very sorry to hear that. I wonder why they only compare it to whites. How much are they being shot or arrested compared to Hispanics or Asians? The world is not just black and white. Well, I bet they would argue that we're a white supremacist society, white-centric. That's what we compare everything to whites. But yeah, that is interesting. Why they don't deal with Asians or Hispanics as much? Maybe because they're not as criminal. I wonder if that matters.
Over black people.
But don't you know it's because they're poor?
Because this is one of the
that's the only reason.
Could make money.
Don't need to look beyond
it's
it.
Like, I forget the statistic on it, but it's like even like the United States is the only country that has a major demographic wherein a female portion of that population is has a higher propensity for violent crime than a male portion. Like, I think black females are more criminal, or at least more likely to commit murders than white males are.
Dang. Because I know there's that Washington Post article about how, what is it? Rich black people are arrested more than poor white people.
Yeah, and that too. Like, even if you take the, I forget exactly how they broke it up. It might have been like 2 standard deviations below the mean in terms of income for black people is still more criminal than like, or I'm sorry, of white people is still more criminal than like 2 standard deviations above the mean for blacks, which to me is a cut and dry refutation that it's really got much to do with, well, it's conflating correlation and causation with respect to wealth.
And this targeting has significant consequences in the instances that don't even lead to death. To give you an example of what the DOJ found, in the summer of 2012, a 32-year-old black man was cooling off in his car after playing basketball in the park. An officer pulled up behind the man and demanded identification. The officer accused the man of being a pedophile simply because there were children in the park and ordered the man out of the car, although there was no indication that he was armed or served as any sort of threat. These investigations added further fuel to the fire.
I mean,
now
I feel like I'm at a disadvantage here because I haven't, like, you can't know everything with respect to these cases, but again, press X to doubt, like, there has to be some other context here that's being
no. It could be entirely conceivable that the cop is just being a douche. But is it because the guy he was oppressing was black, or just because the cop's a douche?
There's that too. And I don't know. I mean, the first person to talk about something sort of sets the tone and drives the narrative, right? So if somebody is reporting to a police dispatcher that, hey, creepy weirdo is ogling my kids in his car. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but they're going to be far more likely to be aggressive in that interaction. Right, wrong, and different. That's how it's going to be, and it's not because he's black.
Right, and just to top it off, there's a New York Times Magazine article from, I think it was June 1999, where one of the people that was quoted in it, he was like a deputy police officer, said one line that I don't think I'm ever going to forget, that in this job, you learn that it's the nice guys that get killed.
Right.
So if you play the nice guy, like apparently a lot of people seem to want police to be, well, okay, that comes with a certain disadvantage just in case you don't know.
Right. And I mean, that becomes more apparent too the more you dig into this and watch body cam footage. Like, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the channel Donut Operator. If you're not, he just breaks down a lot of police footage. But some of the stuff, like some of the body cam footage, they pull a gun out of seemingly nowhere for no freaking reason. Like, it comes out after the fact that they've got an arrest warrant for some sort of violent felony. But I mean, stuff just, it's split second decision making.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And you got to remember that with these cops, it's not like they have the knowledge in the back of their mind that, oh shit, if I get killed, at least I'll respawn about 3 or 4 seconds later and try again.
Right. And
if you die, that's it. And especially if you don't believe in an afterlife, that is literally it.
And hindsight is always 20/20, and you can piece together the motives of the individual involved after the fact. But I mean, cops aren't omniscient. They don't know if, at the next traffic stop somebody's going to whip out a gun.
Right. Yeah.
Fire of the movement and gave empirical,
Fueled in the fire.
quantifiable evidence of the systemic harm that had been inflicted on the black community in Ferguson for years. Today, a coalition of more than 50 organizations make up what is known as the Movement for Black Lives.
But funded by 2 people, probably.
Well, I was about to say also, when they talk about the systemic harm perpetrated on the black people of Ferguson for years, I was just thinking, okay, well, what about the systemic harm black people have perpetrated on Ferguson for years, right? You could think about it that way.
This coalition looks to eradicate white supremacy and build local organizational power in order to intervene in the violence inflicted on black communities.
And they talk about white supremacy too, but never ever. I don't know if you remember during the 2020 riots, the George Floyd riots, where the Not Fucking Around coalition was going around. They actually ended up shooting and killing one of their members with a negligent discharge, if memory serves. But they were walking around like in some sort of paramilitary uniform. I mean, insofar as they're all wearing black clothing, carrying firearms and like marching in close order. Can you imagine what would happen? I mean, white people just carrying tiki torches in Charlottesville like 5 or 6 years ago at this point is still brought up. Like,
right. That's true. Yeah, another asymmetry there, where they can display as much aggression towards crackers like us as much as they want, and you can't take any issue with it, otherwise you're a bigot.
By the state and vigilantes. In explaining how they came to be, the organization says it, quote, was created as a space for black organizations across the country to debate and discuss.
Okay, that's so stupid. Debate and discuss. Yeah, like they're doing any kind of meaningful or balanced debate on any of these topics or conditions. Please give me a frickin' break.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm sure they're all of the same mindset there. There's not a whole lot of diversity of thought.
Good God, yeah.
Develop shared assessments of what political interventions were necessary in order to achieve key policy, cultural, and political wins, convene organizational leadership in order to debate and co-create a shared movement-wide strategy, under the fundamental idea that we can achieve more together than we can separate.
Okay, white people, take notes.
Yeah, I know. Words, buzzwords, white people bad.
Well, no, take notes as in maybe, possibly, potentially, conceivably, in some universe, you could accomplish a little bit more together rather than apart.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we need to be doing the exact same thing these groups are doing if we want to affect any real meaningful political change. Like, they know enough to band together. It's like, it's the fascies meme, like one stick breaks easily, but when we bind them all together, it doesn't break.
Right.
Sometimes Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives can be used interchangeably. Sometimes in reference to the specific organization and sometimes in reference to the larger movement. Either way, what's true is that the movement for Black lives has consistently increased general awareness of the state-sanctioned and extrajudicial violence inflicted on Black communities every day. Another
extrajudicial violence? Is he claiming that lynchings are still happening? Because that seems to be what he's intimating.
No, I mean, he probably is, but you could take a look at what Rodrigo Duterte, I think he was the president of the Philippines, just up until a year or two ago, and he tackled the drug problem by executing drug dealers. And I think even though the state was doing it, it was called extrajudicial because I guess it wasn't done trial by jury. I think it wasn't done with a fair trial. It was just kind of, executions in rough proportion.
The thing this coalition does that is especially important is making sure that in the fight for racial justice, they are fighting for communities within the larger Black community that have historically been pushed to the side or completely ignored in the fight for Black liberation.
Black liberation? Liberation from what precisely?
That means it often
if you want to get liberated from us, by all means.
Please, why don't you go to Liberia?
Yeah.
Black women and folks along the gender spectrum. Black queer and...
It's so weird to me that they're trying to lump this all together. It is so bizarre to me because they're the ones who have the most viscerally anti-gay reaction.
Yeah, they're more grug-brained in the aggregate than we are as a race. But, I mean, the fact that these groups are coincidentally grouping together kind of tips the hand that it's not necessarily about the thing itself. It's about overturning anything left over of decency in this nation.
Well,
just got to attack it all full-throated.
Let's suppose they do come out on top. Like, the year is 2322, right? And white people gone. These people will... I mean, this movement will lose all cohesion. They'll tear each other apart because these two, Black liberation and women, I mean, they're all diametrically opposed. The only thing holding together the left at this point in time is, sort of this unity in their hatred of white people.
Yeah.
And as soon as, white people gone, they're just going to turn on each other.
Yeah.
Trans community, Black disabled people, Black people with criminal records, Black people who are undocumented.
The Black people who... What, are we getting a lot of illegal immigration? Like, are people swimming across the Atlantic Ocean from Nigeria or something like that? What is...
No, it does. See, it's that's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could claim that they're overstaying their visas, but you don't... That's not traditionally associated with people from Africa doing that.
Right.
And it's I don't know that we necessarily... It doesn't strike me as the best idea to liberate people with criminal records.
No, they're only in there because some cop illegally pulled them over, found that they had 1 milligram of weed somewhere in the car. So then they got beat up and sent to jail for 55 years. So those are the people we need to liberate.
The movement operates from the belief that none of us are free until all of us are free. In 20...
Is it actually Somalis, B. Williams, or are you being facetious? Are Somalis coming over here and overstaying their visas?
I'm open to that possibility.
20, following the death of George Floyd, an estimated 15 to 26 million people participated in Black Lives Matter protests in the United States alone. And the movement has gained international traction as well, with protests organized in places like Australia, Denmark, Canada, Japan, England, Brazil, just to name a few. There's no...
Let's take a look at the demographics of those nations. This makes sense. Not so much.
Yeah, no, those are very white countries.
Yeah, for the time being. Tristan says maybe Haitians. I would be open to that possibility too.
A few. There is no doubt that over the course of the past decade, the Black Lives Matter movement has contributed to a shift in public consciousness around issues of race in the United States and around the world. More people, not all, but more, now understand that racism is not just an interpersonal phenomenon like a racial slur or KKK rally, but recognize racism as something.
Can you imagine how much coverage KKK rallies would get if they still existed? Like, we would know if it ever happened.
Yeah. No, we could.
Is embedded within structures and systems and institutions. While there is still a long way to go.
Oh, still a long way to go. Boy, is that not going to be the last time.
There will always be a long way to go.
Of course. It's it wasn't that the same shit that Rachel Albert said. I think, what was the phrase she used? It was a long way to go, or there's still a lot of work to do, I think might have been the phrase.
Something like that.
More nuanced, sophisticated, historically accurate conversation about...
Yeah, they're real concerned about sophisticated, historically accurate conversation.
Race is possible in ways that weren't
sophisticated
prior to the evolution of the movement. Another thing we want to be clear on is that the movement for Black Lives is not just about what organization you are or are not formally affiliated with.
It's about fuck white people.
It really is. It really is. And I don't know why they try and insist that there's no sort of structure to these organizations. Like, I know why they do it. You know, they want to claim that these are all grassroots movements, but there's clearly a lot of funding here. Like, somebody is paying for the buses. You know, somebody is making the signs.
There have been
somebody's dropping off pallets of bricks.
People in communities across the country who are not formal members of any particular group, but who have been fighting for justice in their hometowns.
And it's like somebody's paying for these microphones too. Like, it's not... They are a member of groups.
For generations. As we said before, the work of building a better world is not just done by any one person or one organization, but is built by the actions of millions and millions of people doing their part in the ways they know best. And on a personal note, this is the last episode of the series. Making this series
thank God it's
Crash
the last
Course
episode
team
of the series.
Oh, you're not getting off that easy.
has been enjoyed.
No, but I'm sure this is just the end screen here. It is getting about the 2-hour mark here.
No, it is. We should definitely be done. I think we're down to like a few people watching.
But
I'm glad that whoever stuck around since the beginning, God bless you. We appreciate the view, appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, but thanks for showing up, guys, and make sure to tune in to tomorrow's stream where B. Williams will be joining us too.
It'll be a blast. We're going to be doing a drinking game, just so you know. All right, every time that the black guy says the word neoliberal or neoliberalism or neoliberalist or whatever, you got to take a shot, and you're going to be getting hammered.
I'll feel lucky if I can string together 2 words at the end of it.